Standing committee reports.
February 13, 2024. Mr. President, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 14, State Fair Board Powers and Responsibilities, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, Larson, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman. February 13, 2024, Mr. President, your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred Senate File 20, Electricity Rates for Costs that do not benefit Wyoming. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Barlow, Boner, Case, Landon, and Scott. Senator Case, Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, I bring this to the body. This morning, as I was listening to committee reports, I noted that there was a committee that had 6 members on it. That was the Agriculture Committee. And as I review the rules 27A, committees in the Senate are 5 members. So, Mr. President, it seems to me that I don't know how we proceed with this, but bills that have been sent to that committee and considered that by that committee, of which I see one on the committee of the whole potential list today, seem to be of suspect. They were not considered as our rules outline. So, Mr. President, however you want to proceed, if you want to have an immediate rules committee or you want to take it under advisement for another time, but I think this needs to be resolved based on some of the conversations we had yesterday about our adherence to the rules and traditions of this body. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Barlow, without your objection, I'm going to send that to the Rules Committee, but it won't be immediate. We've got at least one other issue. I think Rules will routinely meet probably tomorrow sometime. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business, consideration of bills on general file.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate resolve itself into the committee of the whole.
Heard that motion. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carried. Senator Kolb, please assume the throne.
So what should I do?
I'll just read it. I'll just do it.
You want to do it now?
I think you should not.
Especially stand to use the sound of the gavel.
No, I'm sure I can do it. But you would be ensemble. So, okay.
So we'll finish the bill.
We're not.
You want to use it.
We're not on the bill.
I'm sure I hear you.
What?
Then-
Okay, just
So
wait
I
then.
think
We'll
we'll
peg Lee.
stop.
Okay, we'll go
Egg,
ahead.
leave, and rise again.
But
No,
not now.
not
Start
yet.
again.
The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 12. Will the reading clerk please read Senate File 12?
Senate File 12, Meat Processing Plants, Hides and Carcasses, an act relating to hides and carcasses, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee. It was referred to Committee number 5, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, Larson, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Senate File 12, Meat Processing Plants, Hides and Carcasses, and ask for your favorable consideration, and I will turn the explanation of the bill over to the good Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This bill is pretty simple. Believe it or not, hides just aren't valuable anymore. You know, I was shocked to learn that. Because way back in the day, I think it was South Korea, or one of them, the Asian country, bought hides as many as by the millions. So I was pretty surprised at that. So, you know, the gist of this is where hides that were going to a landfill, say, you had to have a brand inspector come out and check the brand. Well, that's costly. For what? To shove dirt on the thing? You know, waste of money, waste of time. So on page 2, at the top is the gist of this under C. If a hide is sold to a hide buyer, so there are still some hides being sold. So if a hide is sold to a hide buyer, the bill of sale shall accompany the hide and shall be available for inspection by an authorized Wyoming brand inspector, department inspector, sheriff, or deputy sheriff during regular business hours for not less than 2 years from the date of sale of the hide. So and then down at the bottom, the new language on 23, hides and pelts for not less than 2 years from date of purchase. So it's simply trying to say, not going to have to require a brand inspection if you're taking it to the dump. You know why? Waste of time with the brand inspector, waste of his time, waste of the producer's time, just waste of time, waste of money. But if it is sold, then there needs to be a record of it for a couple of years. So that's the gist of it. So pretty simple thing. And stand for any questions?
Thank you, Senator. Questions? Questions? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, we will do so with favorable recommendation of Senate File 12, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 12 passes committee of the whole. The next bill, you want division? Oh, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't mean to interrupt. Did you finish what you needed to do up there?
I am at that point, yes, if we would need to move on to the next.
Just as soon as you do, Mr. Chairman, I was going to ask you for privilege of the floor, but please finish what you were doing.
Senator Landon, no, I'm finished. You have privilege of the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Fellow senators, please join me in welcoming representatives of Wyoming's 21 credit union members here this afternoon. These member-owned financial cooperatives represent 336,000 credit union members across our state and provide service at 70 different Wyoming branches. Representatives from our Wyoming Community Credit Unions join us today from Trona Valley, Atlantic City, Sunlight, Pathfinder, Unawyo, Stage Point, Blue, First Education, Meridian Trust, Y High, and Black Hills Federal Credit Unions. Please welcome all these folks to the Wyoming Senate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Glenn. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 47. Would the reading clerk please read Senate File 47?
Senate File 47, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions, an act relating to compensation and benefits, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee. It was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation of Senate File 47, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions. And here to walk us through this fine bit of legislation is my colleague, Senator Mike Guru.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good senators, I bring you Senate File 47. This is kind of reprising a role I had last year. This is the first in a suite of bills, not a boutique suite, but a suite nonetheless, regarding compensation. Your retirement system and the folks at Joint Appropriations and CapFin have been working through the interim, trying to keep up and keep timely with all our retirement plans. And this is the first here. This is law enforcement retirement contributions. And as you can see on page 1, just the definition and law enforcement officers, contributions, disability benefits. Let's see, and go on to page 2. And I'm working off a copy that was just handed. I got to find my notes. That this is, let's see, we've got June 30th. Yeah, this is extended payments, benefits provided to law enforcement officers, contributions from employers, and down in section B, employment. Each employer of a law enforcement officer covered under this article may pay into account 8.6% of salary paid through June 30th, 24, and thereafter 11.1/10%. That's 11.1% of the salary paid to each of the officers covered under this title must pay into the account starting in 24. And then this may be opposed with city and state people working in law enforcement. So this is state employees who work as dispatchers through the department, through the troopers department, and then all county employees, county dispatchers, Department of Corrections workers. So you have state employees that we pick up half of the percentage as employers, and the employees pay the other half. In cities, counties, towns, it's kind of all over the board. In some counties, in some jurisdictions, the employer pays both halves. In some, it's varied to pay less than that or more, and it's kind of all over the board. But for state employees, by virtue of this legislation, the state pays half and the employee pays half. So I know that's a little bit convoluted because you'll see another bill that will have officers that are the troopers and DCI personnel, and that's a separate department. This is dispatchers, Department of Corrections, the folks that work at the prison are the state employees. Then this also involves all the county employees as well. So as you go on, You also see appropriated to the University of Wyoming, $75,000 to provide payment increase in employer contributions. That's on page 3, line 13. Other state employees, as you turn to page 4. The appropriations in this section shall only be extended to provide payment and increase in each state agency's employer contribution rates as required by section 9-3-432. Continuing on, other provisions of law accompanying this section to be transferred. The state auditor shall transfer funds to the retirement system. And on to page 5, the effective date. This bill, like I say, just continues to make sure that we try to get the actuarial soundness of these funds. The Department of the Retirement Service System has told us that if we don't do this, if we don't keep up on this in a timely fashion, that the numbers, the actuarial numbers will start to go down. The fund will become less solvent. And our goal has always tried to be to bring you the opportunity to make sure that we keep this on a trajectory where we get to full funding. As we know, in many states of our sister and brother states around the country, this is an ongoing concern. It has not been a concern in this state, except in a couple of instances. I direct your attention, I'll talk about this now, and I'll kind of go through all the bills. You'll remember just a short time ago, we had to spend over $150 million to make solvent Plan A, the old fireman pension account. We're going to go through these today in an attempt to make sure that never happens again, that we don't have to come to you when the situation is that dire and retirees are on the block. So with that, I'll stand for any questions on this first bill, Senate File 47, Law Enforcement Retirement Contributions.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, for my colleague, we've gone from the 8.6 to the 11.1. Typically, when we do that, the actuaries look at this. I know JAC had looked at this a year ago, and this particular account was actually going down. It wasn't even maintaining. But with this level of increase, when we went from the 8.6% contribution to the 11.1%, what is the projected point now? Is this on a 30-year actuarially analysis that the fund would be solvent in 30 years, or where are we at with that? Is it a 20-year look, 10?
Senator DeGrew.
That's a fantastic question. And now that I have my notes in front of me, it's one that I might even be able to answer. Right now, in 2023, we're 84.3% of full funding. If we continue upon the course we're on right now with no changes, in 2000, it will start to decline in 2027, dropping down by 2000 if we continue 2053 to be 55.5% of actuarial soundness. If we make the change that we propose to you today, the actuarial folks tell us that we will be by 2049 at 95.5%. So that gets us to almost 100%, and that is a more sound level to go forward to fulfill the covenant we've made with those folks.
Senator Kensky.
Thank you. Did you hear the one about the CPA? His kid asked him why he became a CPA, and he said, well, they told me I had too much personality to become an actuary. This is a good one, folks. It's a good one. The actuaries sit around and predict when we're going to die, what our life expectancy is. It's all very complicated stuff, and sometimes they get it wrong and sometimes they get it right. They've gotten it wrong in the past, and the state of Wyoming made some decisions that turned out to be disastrous for its pension funds. Let me give you a little bit of overview that's going to apply to every one of these retirement bills. 10 years ago, when I showed up here, our unfunded pension liability for the state of Wyoming was $1.5 billion. Our unfunded pension liability today is $2.6 billion. So we can kind of look down at those big liberal, big spending states and think we're paragons of virtue, but we're right in there with the rest of them. We promised too much and we didn't collect enough is what it comes down to on these retirement funds. And as it turns out, the longer you wait, the worse it gets. So to go back to the reference to Fireman A, probably going back 20 years ago, we had a chance to fix it for maybe $30–40 million. We finally fixed it last year. It was $175 million. These things only get worse for the waiting. This has been a long, slow evolution on our retirement system. And I think I've got this story correct. It used to be the board, which was part professionals, part retirees, had the decision to award cost of living increases. They had the authority to decide what they would use as the interest rate on their future income projections. They had the authority to decide on aspects of the benefits. That's all been taken away by the legislature. So now Governor Gordon has been careful to appoint people to the board who truly understand investment policies. There's still some retiree representation. If there is a COLA to be awarded, it would come out of this body, but our statutes say there are no cost of living adjustments until the fund is 100%. And we don't have a fund at 100%. We've got multiple funds, none at 100%. The board, for what was probably way too long, deemed that they were going to earn 8% on their investments. What that meant is they looked pretty healthy. Finally, various legislators that were there as liaisons said, you've got to get this more realistic. And it is now more realistic. It's a 6.8% forward projection. It still seems a bit rich to me. I don't get that on my retirement portfolio, but probably Senator Ide probably earns 10 or 12% because he's heavily into real estate. But so we've done the things that we had to do to figure out what the depth of the problem is. And now what we've got to do is get the contribution rate right. And that means that the employee has to pay some, the state has to pay some. So it's tempting when you see the size of the appropriations on these things to say, you know, I'm not sure I want to vote for that kind of money, but it's pay me now or pay me a lot more later. So with that as kind of a background, I wanted to, because we've got quite a few of these bills coming, I wanted you to understand that. I want you to also know I've got coming, and I'm hoping I have it today. I asked the retirement system, we said, what about the benefits? They said, well, you know, if you dig into the benefits, it takes about 20 years to kick in to really get any impact. And all the agencies said they didn't want to do that because it's hard to recruit. And I said, okay, I want to see what the benefit, I want to see what that is. Because you apply it to the new hires. I want to see what that is. I'll share it with the body. But meanwhile, what we have here is an increase in the retirement contribution. So having been through this multiple times and having lost multiple times on these retirement bills, I just want to tell you what's coming. When the employees see that they're being asked to pay it a bit more, and sometimes quite a bit more, your email will light up, your phone will light up. I don't want to do that. And we've lost the bills before because of that. A prior law enforcement bill that failed, I had a young man as a constituent, works for one of the law enforcement agencies, and he just started on one side, chewed me up and down the other. And I said, you know, you're young. By the time you get to retirement age, your fund will be insolvent. I'll be dead. But just remember, I tried to help you. And you know, this is savings. This is savings. This is savings towards a great pension plan. You retire at 20 years or 25 years, you get your highest years. And so, but that's hard. You know, what people see is, well, you know, before they said, I haven't gotten a raise in so many years. Now they've gotten 2 raises in 2 years. And we had a young man there. I respect him. He said, we just got a raise. Now this is essentially a cut to that raise. Well, yeah. Plan B is if you really want to, if you really want to make sure the bill goes, the state just picks up the entire tab. And we've got multiple plans we're trying to fix here. So that would be expensive, but you know, that's another option is we just pick up the tab for the employees as has been done in the past. The one other thing that you'll hear about these is, and Senator Grew will help me out, in this particular plan, which consists of city police, sheriffs, Department of Corrections, dispatchers with YDOT, and UW security. Typically the towns, the cities, counties, a lot of them just go ahead and pick up all of the employee share or most of the employee share. And now here we've got a bill that says, no, the state is not going to pick up this other half of this increase. The employee has to pick up their half. That's what this bill says. And so you'll hear, well, you know, the town of such and such is going to pick this up. That's unfair. And I don't know what to say to that. You know, sometimes that's the way things work out. 77% of this fund is local. The remainder is the state of Wyoming. Actuarially, where we are is the fund is currently, and I've got the exhibit here. I'm sorry, we didn't anticipate we'd be up this soon, or I'd give you this exhibit, but it shows that currently we're at 84% funding. Unless we do something, we're on a dramatic decline to where it's at 55% in 30 years, which goes against every statutory mandate we have to try and make sure that these things stay solvent. So this increase in this plan, it still takes 30 years to get to 95%. It just takes that long to build up. So that's the story we have, and it's going to be a similar story in each of these bills. The numbers may be a little bit different. So how did they decide in this bill and these others how much the employee is going to be picking up and how much the state is going to be picking up? They looked at what the ratio is already relative to how much the state is paying, how much the employee is paying, and they applied that same ratio just to maintain that same ratio. What you'll see is in some, you know, I remember at the city of Sheridan, the employees were paying half their retirement. The firemen, the city was paying 90% of their retirement. Police, the city was paying 2/3 of their retirement. People tell me it wasn't fair. I don't know what to do about it. It's just the way things work out. But it's a nice retirement plan. It's a good retirement plan. So with that, I just wanted to give some additional information for Senator Grew's presentation, and I'll just let Senator Grew answer all the questions that I raised.
Thank you, Senator Ginsburg. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the concern I have, which was briefly touched upon, and I'd like to hear what the conversation was in committee, does get to the fact that this year, it's my understanding that for the year that this would go into effect and for that entire year, there would be no additional pay increases, but this would go into effect. It would be effectively a 2.5% cut to their salary in a year when they didn't have any external cost adjustment, cost of living adjustment, or anything along those lines. And recall, Mr. Chairman, that 2.5% cut in salary is not the 2.5% cut in take home, right? Because we have to take taxes out, we have to take their benefits out and everything else out before that. So you're probably talking more like a 5 to 10%, probably around 5% cut in take home pay, probably a couple $1,000s a year of less take home for these individuals. And the idea that we've had massive, robust pay increases to obviate inflation over the last few years, I think is perhaps an overstatement. The reality is we've had inflation over the past few years, Mr. Chairman, that we're on the order of up to 8% at some times. And we certainly didn't give out that level of pay increase. So when we're contemplating, you know, how these hardworking folks in the state of Wyoming that are doing the people's business and enforcing laws are going to be able to have enough paycheck to actually just buy their food, when we're literally taking about $2,000 away from them with this act as drafted. $2,000 that they had available to them this year would not be available to them next year if this passes as written. You know, is that perhaps not a little too much out of their pocket? And Mr. Chairman, to be clear, I understand all the math. I understand how the actuarial soundness works. I understand the importance of us keeping up. But this shifts to the point where 1 out of every $9 earned goes to that retirement fund without any compensation increase at the same time. So I'd ask if there was discussion about trying to perhaps balance that a little bit better, or perhaps I'm mistaken about whether the Appropriations Committee is recommending a concurrent increase in salary that would offset this, which would be just fine if salary went up by 2.5%, basically takes this out. So what was the discussion there, and was consideration given to those hardworking people of Wyoming that will have $2,000 of their actual spending cash taken away from them?
Thank you, Senator Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for the question. I direct your attention to page 4, lines 10 through 12, where we say no amount of this appropriation in this section shall be used to provide an increased employee contribution required by this act. That was put in after a robust discussion by the JAC. And the point was, fairly so. Once again, this is a smaller number of state employees. The vast majority, 77%, I think was the number, are folks in cities, counties, municipalities, different political subdivisions that all do their own deal. Some pay all of it, some pay none of it, and everywhere in between. The feeling of your JAC was simple. We have, and this body has approved, enterprise-wide pay adjustments for the last 2 years. Of pretty hefty percentages, as you all well know. This year, we did, in the last go-around in the budget, we did approve an amendment to take employees that were over 5 years in our employ, another reclassification update. You'll see this when we present the budget here at the end of the week. Bottom line, it was the feeling of the majority of the JAC that we felt we've done the job for the employees. And since this money is coming, yes, out of their pocket, and I want to try and get that number if this passes today, have some more numbers on second reading. I don't, with all due respect to the Senate, I don't know if that number was 2,000 or what the number was, but we should find it so the body knows. But the bottom line for the JAC, the majority of folks in JAC were resolute about saying, we feel like we've done the job. And we feel like we want to keep this. And I actually talked to the Lieutenant Colonel who brought the question. Said, it's been a feeling of this body, the Senate, for sure, is that we would rather err on the side of being able to say that another body 20, 30, 40 years from now won't be looking at our employees and saying, the fund's bankrupt and you're not going to get the money that we promised you. And to do it, we have to ask you to make a contribution now. That's the way this system works. And that's that was the ask that this JAC is asking, and is asking you to codify in this bill. But if you don't, page 4, lines 10 through 12 will be the place to look. But that's the JAC position. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Senator Ride.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure where to start here. This, our national government is the biggest guilty party of doing this exact same thing. I mean, we've got the biggest Ponzi scheme that ever happened with Social Security. We're taking from the newer generation because the money's not there from, the older generation that's, paid into it. And they've already robbed that bank account. We're doing something similar here effectively. And I get it. I mean, the good, hardworking employees, they deserve, what they earn and what they signed on for. But, you mentioned this has gone on a long time and other states have the same problems. And we need a different solution because it's just going to happen all of the time. I think you pay the employees increased salary and they decide on their own how they want to invest their retirement money. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator French.
Okay, I'm going to try to keep my cool here. I'm going to push back a little bit to the good senator. these funds were, the retirement thing got out of whack to the tune of what, $175 million? That last year, I believe it was, or whatever, we put in there to make it solvent because the people weren't paying into it. Well, that money's everybody's money. So a lot of people in the state, good, hardworking people, their money was going to prop up a retirement fund that the benefits of beneficiaries of that weren't paying into. They don't have a retirement fund, but their tax dollars were paying to pay for the other guy, the retirement fund, get it up to be solvent. So those people, when they retired or got vested in there, got a retirement. And they didn't. So there's two sides to this story. Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the offer by the good senator from Teton County of kind of providing more data and information. I think that would be helpful to understand salary levels and understand what this actually means in the accurate numbers as opposed to the estimates that I provided. So I'll look for those on second reading. Regarding the us against them kind of approach where we're thinking through these funds being supported by people of the state of Wyoming. Well, all of these funds start off coming from the state of Wyoming. These are employees of the state of Wyoming. And this fund, this program, everything about the retirement is not in the hands, to the good point of the senator from Natrona County, it's not in the hands of these employees. They are captive to a system that they control nothing about. They enter into an agreement, Mr. Chairman, to be employed by the state of Wyoming, generally at below market wage. Even with all of the recent increases, nobody's at market average. So below market wage, they work hard for the state of Wyoming. And because we haven't managed that fund and we didn't offer the fund in an original form in a way that was sensible, and that was long before our time when these funds were set up in terms of how they were planned. But it wasn't necessarily sensible, all the promises that were made. Because of those mistakes of the past, this chamber is going to say, all right, you all have to pay a little bit more because we have to keep up with the expenses moving forward. And we're going to take that out of your paycheck. Which again, Mr. Chairman, I don't know exactly how much will be taken out. But if the average salary all in is 80,000, which hopefully it is, but it's probably not, it's probably more like 50. At 80,000, that would be about $2,000 a year lost. If it's 50,000, then it's a little bit less, maybe more like $1,500. But those are the real dollars, right? That's the take home that's going away. And I think we all know this. We don't have a tremendous amount of wealth in here. We all feel our paychecks. We all understand when we're taking home salary and how important those take home dollars are, Mr. Chairman. And when those dollars are reduced, by $200 a month. Everyone in here think about that. Every salary earner in here, think about the idea of having your monthly paycheck reduced by a couple $100 or your weekly paycheck reduced by 100 because this chamber decided that and that it's good for them because of actuarial soundness 30 years out. Again, I'm not going to argue with the actuarial soundness. I trust them. They're probably fairly accurate, even though it's a mysterious game. But what I do know is the implications of losing $100 a week for an employee that's probably not making a hell of a lot of money to begin with. They're not going to hit a home run. They don't have a few $100,000 on the horizon for a salary. These aren't the people we're talking about here. These are folks that do work hard. They're trying to make ends meet. And the way this legislation is structured, it takes money out of their pockets. And it doesn't have to. There's a few ways, Mr. Chairman, that this can be addressed. One is we effectively eliminate half the bill. It only moves us in half the direction. And so the state portion is increased. The individual out of pocket is not increased. Same appropriation amount, and it doesn't do as good of a job of addressing the actuarial soundness, but perhaps we could look to a year where we have a simultaneous increase and remedy that. Alternatively, at double the appropriation, a bill like this could be remedied by picking up that amount on the state side, eliminating the paragraph on page 4 that the good senator from Teton County mentioned, and recognizing that when it's the state's planning that created the problem, that the honest thing to do is have the state fix the problem, not have it come out of the pocket of the hardworking employees. So there are options. We can look at those options perhaps on second reading, but the idea that they're taking advantage of us in any way, when we're the ones that wrote the deal, offered the deal, and are now trying to backtrack on that deal because we didn't do the calculations well enough a few years ago, doesn't seem appropriate. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just for some clarifications, we're not taking anything away from the employees. This is called deferred wages. And so we take $1 out, we match it with $1, and then we put it in your retirement income. So all of that money that is now coming out as deferred income, for when people most need income in their life is when they get into their senior years and they start retiring. The reason we do these is because historically people didn't do that, and then they become a perpetual liability to the taxpayers, even when they're not a state employee. So to characterize that we're taking something away is a mischaracterization. In fact, we're saying we're just going to defer your income to later on, and we're going to double it. I don't know, it seems to me like that's a pretty good deal. Anytime I could give you $1 right now, and 5 years from now, you're going to give me 2 back, I doubled my money. That's what we're doing here. We're doing it for those very people so that they have a retirement system. So here we can go in there, we can cut benefits. We can reduce the payment on that stuff. This is an equitable situation where you defer their income and then you double it for the times in their life that they're most likely going to need that income. So let's just keep the characterization. And on the taxation, everybody knows that on your retirement accounts, that's deferred tax on it. You pay on your adjusted gross income. First thing they do is subtract out all those retirement contributions you make to your 403B and all these other things. So they're not taxed on that contribution. So it's not the 10% that it's portrayed to be. So just let's be careful what we're doing here. We're doubling their retirement account.
Senator Kinski.
Now you see why I enjoy working on retirement plans so much. Just a couple things that I hope are germane. I know the retirement system is listening here. When my colleague from the Ivory Tower said the 2.5% really works out to 5 or 6%, I'm lost on that math because it comes out pre-tax, but I'll ask the retirement system to set me straight on that. And I'll have some more information for you on that tomorrow. My good friend, the realtor from Casper, you talked about a self-directed account. And this is what's so bad about the dilemma that we placed ourselves in. Yeah, it's us, but it's everybody who came before us. There's a colleague on the other side of the house that you can talk to, a representative that about 10 years ago just worked his heart out on trying to see how we could transition people from what's called a defined benefit plan, a traditional pension, to a defined contribution plan, which would be like an IRA or a 401k. And what he came up with is you collapse the entire system because there is a Ponzi scheme aspect to it. Because if you don't have more people coming in, they quit paying, all of a sudden there's enough to pay the retirees because the plan's underfunded. So if we're ever to get to that point where we can get away from these defined benefit plans, a traditional pension plan, and get on to like a 401k plan, first we have to get these things fully funded so they can stand on their own 2 feet. And that's part of what this bill is. To my colleague from Cody, I get the upset. I'm not, maybe at some point you can clarify for me a little bit what the relation was of the bailout of Fire A to this. What we're trying to avoid is another Fire A bailout. That's what we're trying to avoid. Nip the problem in the bud early before it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And so that's what the point of all these bills is. So there's a dilemma. This is, I'm kind of they say a pessimist is just an optimist with all the facts. This is the way I feel about these retirement bills, because God bless the Appropriations Committee. They said, let's take one more shot at it. And I go, well, okay, I've got scars on my back from every prior attempt, but we'll give it a shot. It comes down to this. If you pay the employee's share, you drive up the cost of the bill and raise the probability the bill will die because you're spending so much money. If you don't pay the employee's share, you raise opposition among the employees and increase the probability the bill dies. So I've been looking for a win-win on these retirement bills for a long time. But your Appropriations Committee made the choice in light of those two, as my colleague said, in light of those 2 rounds of pay increases, to bring these to you where the employee pays their share. Some employees more, some employees yes. But as my friend from Bags said, this is deferred compensation. I mean, they get it back in just in a good, solid retirement plan that people in the private sector rarely have anymore. Right or wrong, mostly what I'm hinging my argument on it is, when you're in a hole, what's the number 1 rule? Quit digging. Quit digging. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to amplify my senator's remarks, the chairman's remarks, probably you might be looking at all these bills and you're asking yourself a question: why don't we just do the same thing for everybody? Why don't we just have one size fits all on this retirement? You pay this, we pay this, and go. We asked that question today, and we were told by our friends at Retirement, the reason why each plan is a little bit different is because of the makeup of the members of each plan. The judicial plan that's going to come up, judges, it's a different group of people, different age, whether it's firemen or whether it's EMTs or online patrol officers, different age groups, different stress levels, different physical requirements, all play into the actuarial soundness and how they how they put together their actuarial tables on this. So that's why each one is just a little bit different. You'll see some nuances of each. And so that's the why. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the discussion of defined benefit versus defined contribution. And my question to the chairman would be, if we could get the numbers, if we were to bail out this pension plan, what would the cost be to bail it out to get it to 100%? And then could we then, once it's bailed out, transition everything to a defined contribution plan going forward and fix the problem that our predecessors have left us with? How much would that cost? If you have that number, I'd be curious to know. Thank you.
Senator Kinski.
I'll get the number from the retirement system, assuming that this proceeds to second. And my friend from Sheridan, I know you're young and healthy and you work out, but you'll feel the ticker jump when you see the number. It's going to be a big, big number.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, following up on that last question, why isn't the number, if we talk not just about this retirement plan, but about all of them? And I think with that proposed solution, you probably have to talk about all of them. Why isn't that number what the actuarial unsoundness of this plan currently is? And that figure was what, 2.5, 2.6 billion? Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it would seem to me that was the number, and that is a much bigger number than I think we can handle. So That's why I intend to support the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Chairman. On this one, I don't think we can afford the solution that in many ways is the most appealing, the solution that many of our private businesses have used, going to the defined contribution plan.
Senator Guerrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In answer, just not the total answer, which we'll get for you, but just in this increase, the one that we're discussing right now, if you approve it, would produce $9.272 million in planned revenue. That would put us on a path for to 95% of actuarial soundness by 2053. So just so you have an idea of what the number that's coming, to say how much would this be to make it actuarially sound 100% today, 9.2 million just to put us on a glide path to get there in 30 years. So the number is going to be fairly substantial. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion? Senator Biden.
Sorry for those of us not on approps, we don't get the skinny on all these numbers and the details. The question I have then is, you know, what do these investments look like? These pension fund investments, are they, what kind of returns are they generating? Because it doesn't seem like, I mean, we're pumping a lot of money into it and not getting a lot out. Are they pretty conservative investments? It just for our edification purposes, for those of us not on the committee, what are we looking at on the rate of return on these state pension plans?
Senator Guerrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good question. Right now, and this is, once again, they keep reworking these numbers all the time. The older numbers were predicated on 8% return. In the past 2 years, that number's dropped down to 6%. And so they're now putting in all their numbers at a 6% return. We're hoping, and of course, if you watch the markets lately, it's doing much better. That's why we're also with our total return policy at CapFin. All the things that we're doing is trying to pump that number up. But right now, the numbers that are being pushed into it are at a 6% return. And so that's what we're looking at. And that's the best answer. And we'll get a clarifying answer, but that's the best one right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of? Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Rothfuss.
And just on that last point, I'd note that when I began in the legislature and it was structured at 8%, everything looked great, honestly. Most of the funds were very close to being actuarially sound, but a little bit more work needed to be done. They were probably in the 90% range, and they were being tweaked at that point in time. Because if you're projecting 8%, you can imagine that everything is going to look very rosy and it doesn't take nearly as much. So a big part of the reason why it looks crisis now is because that 8% projection has been lowered, and that's not a bad plan. I'm not criticizing that because 8% certainly seems like a lot. But this is a crisis that has sort of developed because we adjusted that number realistically. And again, it was a good choice to adjust that number down. But that's the reason why we suddenly have gone from being very close to actuarial sound, everything looks good, to, oh my gosh, the sky is going to fall because we don't think we'll get 6% or more than 6% in the long run. And I think it's just important to realize that if that number were 7%, things would start looking good. If somehow it were 9%, oh my gosh, we're overfunded. That number right there determines whether we're in catastrophic need of injecting new funds into the retirement system, or whether everything's rosy and we can give a rate holiday and an ECA. It's just that number that matters based on the structure of the system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Ginsky.
The earnings were revised down to 6.8 is the number. I'll get you the information on the investments. The investment team, there's been a lot of reworking, starting with when our current governor was at treasurer and when the retirement system being urged by some of our legislative liaisons. And the performance used to be underperformance. And now they're in the top quartile of funds, I believe. And it's a portfolio that is tilted towards the higher earning, the equities. Because you've got to get out there to get the kind of returns that you need to have. But the chief investment officer at the state has a different portfolio allocation for every fund, depending on how many years they're looking out. And this and the PMTF are the highest earning and also the highest risk, but you're looking at, you're saying, we're not spending it all tomorrow. We don't need this cash right away. This is a 30-year horizon, so they can go heavier on the risk. So just a word about actuarial projections. Part of it is not just the earnings. People are living longer. I mean, you go back over the last 20 years and they were using the actuarial tables back then, and now people are living longer. So that impacts it. And then Fire A, I'm familiar with it because I was mayor in a small town for a long time where what I found out in the 90s is the actuaries said, you know what, that plan is rock solid. You don't even need to make any contributions anymore. And so they cut off putting contributions in, and it turned out they were rock wrong. And it might have had something also to do, I don't know if there were additional benefits that were thrown in there or cost of living or whatever, but it just is a classic case in how to do everything wrong on a pension plan. And every time the actuaries come, I'm always very skeptical to the conservative side of anything they tell us. Because I don't want to rely on one of those reports and then you drop your caution and then you hand a problem to the next legislature 4 to 8 years out.
Senator Grew.
I'm good. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh. Senator Anderson.
Chairman, I like this bill. I want to do something about this fund to keep it sound and for sure in the future. And if anybody's really concerned about the employees and how it's affecting them, I think Senator Grew brought it up that on page 4, line 10 through 13, we could eliminate that paragraph and then the state would pay that. I believe that's $1 million decision. We're paying our half and it's costing us $1 million. So if we paid the employees half, I believe that'd be another $1 million. And I'm sure in favor of that. Thank you.
Further discussion? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that when committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 47, say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 47 has passed committee of the whole. Majority Floor Leader Hicks. Oh, yeah, with the committee of the whole. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes.
Okay, everybody, pretty special. Yesterday I placed an order for a referee, and today a coach shows up. You won't believe this. Please join me in welcoming the University of Wyoming head football coach, Jay Spavel.
Thank you. It's definitely an honor to represent Cowboy football here and to address, a group of people who do so much for the state of Wyoming and thank you for your service that way. And so it's an honor to be here at a place like this. And this was something that I knew Coach Bowl had come here and done this before. And I, 3-4 months ago, would have never thought I'd been standing here in this position right now at this time. I wore this tie today. I got a gift. This is a gift yesterday. It's red, white, and blue with a bison on it. And I thought this would be a perfect tie to wear here today. And so I, being stupid and silly yesterday, I threw it on like an Instagram story or something. And Logan Wilson plays for the Cincinnati Bengals, played at Natrona County High School from Casper, Wyoming, sent me a message, Coach, that's a sweet tie. And so I knew then I have to wear this here today. So the loyalty to Wyoming runs deep for people who have been a part of the program and people who grew up in the state. I worked for Coach Bowl for 4 years and loved working for him. He was a great mentor to me, and I'm excited to take the program from where it is now to where we're hoping to take it going forward. And that's the goal and what we'll talk about here today. I love the University of Wyoming. I do have a love for the University of Wyoming. I pay tuition for the University of Wyoming. I have a daughter that's a freshman there right now. And so I see that in a lot different way than maybe what a lot of other coaches would in that regard there. But this is an exciting time for Cowboy football. We had our first 9-win season in the last 27 years. We played in multiple games on national television, beat 2 ranked teams. We were 7-0 at War Memorial Stadium this year. We finished the season on a 3-game winning streak. Over in the house over there is the boot, which I guess will be coming over here by the end of the week. And we have 2 players that's going to be participating in the upcoming NFL Combine with Easton Gibbs and also Frank Crum, who's from Laramie. And I think that's a great thing for another Wyoming-born player to have his opportunity to be a draftable and drafted player. And so we're excited for Frank and wish him all the luck in the world coming up in the Combine. Players from Wyoming are critical to our success, and they're going to be critical to our success going forward. We have 13 players from the state of Wyoming currently on our spring roster. We will add 3 more when they finish their high school graduation. And so we'll have 16 players from the state that'll be on our roster in the fall. To highlight a couple, Jordan Bertinoli is an all-conference defensive tackle from Casper, Wyoming. Caleb Driscoll played at Thunder Basin High School up in Gillette. He scored our first touchdown against Texas Tech this past year. Andrew Johnson played at Cheyenne Central. I was the defensive coordinator before and coached the safeties. I coached Andrew directly. Love that young man, and he's getting better in the program and played a good bit of football last year, and his role will increase this year. Will Pellissier is one of our better wide receivers from Bighorn. And he was injured a little bit last year. And so we're looking forward and excited for him to be healthy, going forward where we're at. We have a great momentum in the program right now. We did not lose an impact player to the transfer portal, which is a big deal.
Yes.
That speaks a lot to the culture of the program, but also what we are able to provide for our student athletes at the University of Wyoming. We signed 3 transfers that we think can have an impact for us this fall. And this is the best recruiting class in the 4 years that I've been at Wyoming, top to bottom. From start to finish, top to bottom, this is the best class that we've had. And one of the things that I want to talk about, and one of the things I want to thank you all for, is the Cowboy Joe match, the Cowboy Joe Club match that we have in place at the University of Wyoming has provided us, tremendous opportunities, tremendous facilities, things of that nature. So here's a statistic for you. On official visits this year, these are visits that we can pay for the prospect and their parents to come to our campus. We had a 78% success rate on official visits this past fall. We had 41 paid official visits, and 32 of those players will be in our program this fall. And that is a tremendous rate. And the reasons for that are obvious. We have outstanding facilities. The High Altitude Performance Center, tremendous. But we also have outstanding facilities on campus that we utilize and show. The Gateway Center, the Wildcatter. We use, and then our academic facilities that we're touring people into, the College of Business, the College of Engineering. Our campus shows so very well. It is a beautiful campus. It is a point of pride. And the people who come to see and visit our campus are blown away based on what they see when they get here, because most of them that if they do come from out of state, they don't have a concept of what Wyoming is. And when you ask them before they leave, did it meet your expectation? And almost every time they're like, this is way better than what I thought I was going to see. And so it's a credit to everybody involved that's provided and helped the university to become that. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity. We have the best game atmosphere of the Mountain West Conference. And so I take every chance that I get to thank the fans at the University of Wyoming. And many of you come to the games, things that thank you all that come and make our game atmosphere the best in the conference. And people who come to our campus and visit our place on game weekends are blown away at the atmosphere that we provide for in our in-house games. I think it's tremendous. And we've got tremendous people throughout our organization. So we're very blessed with that too. And so that's a reason why we can have a 78% success rate on people coming to our campus and visiting. We have a very good team coming back this fall. We've got 9 starters back on defense. We've got a lot of talent coming back on offense. We've got our players have done a tremendous job in this offseason. We are a consistently good football program right now that needs to take another step and needs to take that final step to win a championship. And that's what the goal is, and that's what the push is, and that's what we're driving for every day. We have 2 goals in our program that we talk to our players about. We have 2 goals that we focus on. One is for our players to compete academically and to earn their degree. And when I talk about competing academically, we had 30 players this past fall, 30 players that had a 3.5 GPA or above. We had 4 players that had a perfect 4.0 GPA. We have 41 total players in College of Business majors. We have 16 players in College of Health Sciences majors, and we've got 13 players in engineering majors. But within that, one of the things that has really helped us as well with players that have elected to come back and also a transfer who elected to come here, we have 9 players in the MBA executive program at the University of Wyoming. So these guys are doing very well academically, and they're doing very well in a lot of really great fields. And so we're excited about that part of it. As far as the win the Mountain West Conference Championship, yeah, that's our goal. And that's what we're working for every day, but we don't talk about that. And you're not going to hear me talk about it outside of this room. You're not going to hear me talk about it in an interview. We don't talk about it in our building. Our players aren't going to talk about it. Okay. We will not get the result by focusing on the result. We will get the result by focusing on the behaviors, the actions, and the attitudes and the habits that are necessary to achieve the result. And so that's what our focus is. It's a one day at a time process where we are talking about behaviors, attitudes, actions, and habits. And that will ultimately produce the result. So when you see us and you know, hey, that's their goal is to win a championship, you're not going to hear us talking about it. You're not going to hear anything else about it. We know we're one day at a time, and we're trying to get one thing done at a time and achieve that at that level. With the 12-team playoff that's come now, there's an opportunity for us to take our program to the biggest of stages. And any group of 5 team that has a chance to go, a Mountain West Conference champion would certainly be, one of the highest selected of that group. And so we do have an opportunity for that. And that's something that we're striving for. And that's part of, when we say win a Mountain West Conference championship, or what the ultimate payoff would be. But make no mistake about it. I realize and I know what my job is. And that my job is as a leader and director of the front porch of the University of Wyoming. We are not the most important part to our house, but we are the most visible. There's no other activity at the University of Wyoming that can bring 25, 27, 29,000 people together at one time. We played in a game this past year that had a viewership over 1.9 million people. Our Texas Tech game, the first game of the year on CBS, had a viewership of 1.43 million people measured by Nielsen. Okay. And in that game that day, more people watched a Wyoming Cowboy football game than they did Texas A&M, Auburn, Oklahoma, or UCLA. So we are a very visible and viable part of the university, and our job is to show the university in such a great way. When we beat Texas Tech and the crowd floods the field, that looks great for the university. When we beat Fresno State and the crowd floods the field, and these are nationally televised games, it brings exposure to our university. It brings intrigue to our university. It brings interest to our university, and we recognize that. So I hope to see you all when you get a chance to come watch us play in the fall. We've got a couple open practices that we're going to do in the spring, so maybe people get a chance to come watch us practice or anything that way would be great. But thank you. God bless you all. God bless Wyoming. Go Pokes.
Don't go far. Hang tight.
Athletic Director Berman, please come back. I need someone to help lead Cowboy Joe. We're gonna do Ragtime Cowboy Joe before we walk out here. For those of you who don't know, this is Athletic Director Berman. He's been a good friend of the university and of all of us. He and the coach are gonna lead us in Ragtime Cowboy Joe. Go Pokes! Thank you guys very much. Got that for you. Thank you so very much. We're all cheering for you. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business. Consideration of bills on general file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Honorable Senator Cole, please come forward again.
The Committee of the Whole will please come to order. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 49. Will the reading clerk please read Senate File 49?
Senate File 49, Judicial Retirement Program Contributions, an act relating to compensation and benefits, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, and Nethercott. No, Senator Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 49, Judicial Retirement Program Contributions. And I will now defer to Senator Guru for a walkthrough on this bill.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bringing you Senate File 49. Now, if you look in your inbox, you should have a copy of what's at the top of my district, 17, but just down a little bit under the seal, Senate File 49, Judicial Plan Contributions. And I just want to thank the staff for helping us out. We did these bills this morning, and we thought we were going to have a day to put this together to see them, but because we were so efficient this morning getting all the bills done before lunch, we're trying to fill this time. So now we can get the information out to you. So you have in front of you the sheet. Senate File 49 is the second in the suite of bills that we were just talking about to try to bring all of our retirement system plans up to actuarial soundness and to stave off any of those bad pitfalls that we found with other plans in the past. So if you look on this sheet, we'll kind of, or I'll talk about the bill first. If you just walk through the bill, you see it's for employee contributions for judicial retirement program contributions. And it talks about the percentages. It talks about how these percentages are laid out. And of course, we remember this is their own separate branch of government. So once these dollars are released, how they do it and how they pay these percentages out and what they ask for is up to the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court. But as you read on through this page, it shows you the percentages that they're asking for and the effective date. On the back, on 2-page back, is the fiscal note, which you can take a look at. But then I direct your attention to this handout from retirement system. And it kind of walks through the highlights of this. It increases the total contribution rate for judicial pay plan by 2.25%. The rate increase would produce about $208,778 per year. The number of, there are 55 active members, 30 retirees, and 5 beneficiaries on this plan right now. So that's our judicial branch and active judges. And you see the facts bearing on this situation. The judicial plan covers the justices, Supreme Court, district court judges, circuit court judges. Like I say, 55 active members. This plan is presently well funded. The current funding ratio is 99.12, but as you can see on the chart, by 2027, it starts to drift down. That's why we're looking at this increase. The 208,778 that's generated from each year will put us, as you see, put us on a glide path. So by 2053, you see it at 108.2%. If we do nothing, it will just kind of drift down. It's not that bad, but once again, we're trying to be prudent. We're trying to be financially responsible to the employees that we have made these covenants with this retirement system plan. I'll be happy. We've kind of hashed out the broad brush strokes of this, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious what's going on page 2, which is something that's different about changing a employer contribution offset and then a reduction of cash salary of the employee. So this is page 2, lines 13 through 20. I'm actually just trying to understand what's going on there. It's different from what I'm expecting and what I'm used to in other bills. So what's the intent of that shift?
Questions? Going once, going twice. Are you ready for the question? Oh, Senator Guru. Yeah.
I thank the senator for his question. We'll get an answer. I'm looking at my cohorts here, but if I don't get an answer for you, we'll have it on second reading if we move forward.
Thank you, Senator Guru. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Kinski motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 49, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 49 has passed committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 48. Would the reading clerk please read Senate File 48?
Senate File 48, Patrol Warden and Investigator Retirement Contributions, an act relating to compensation and benefits sponsored by the Appropriations Committee. It was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Senator Kinski, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable do pass recommendation of Senate File 48, Patrol Warden and Investigator Retirement Contributions. And I will defer again to my colleague from Teton County, Senator Guru.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back. Oh, it's me. Okay, thank you. We bring you Senate File 48. This is patrol warden investigator retirement contributions. This is for the highway patrol, game and fish wardens, investigators of the AG's criminal investigation division. There are 272 active employees, 311 retirees, 67 beneficiaries. So this is once again, this is a lot, this is our people in a different batch. And as you see, and as you walk through this bill, same thing. It talks about the contribution, talks about the contribution rates. It gives you an effective date. It's pretty much, it's a little bit different language for each one. As I say, each plan is just a little bit different. But if you turn your attention to the sheet that's on your desk from the retirement system, designated Senate File 48 that was just handed out to you, you'll see once again, this is employee contribution rate increase from the current 14.56 to 18.92. It's a plus 4.36%. This will generate $1.154 million a year in revenue. And what does that revenue do? Right now, the plan is funded to 80%, 80.6%. And once again, if we keep going on this path and don't do anything, it'll start to just drop just a bit. And it'll end up at 76.9%. With this change, the contribution rate goes up and it puts it on a path to go to 102.4% by 2053. Like I say, this is just another in this series. We'll have one more after this. Be glad to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You ask any questions? Okay.
Questions? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that the committee of the whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 48, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Senate File 48 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 67. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 67?
Senate File 67, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions, an act relating to public employment retirement sponsored by the Appropriations Committee. Was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, and Nethercott. No, Senator Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable do pass recommendation on Senate File 67. And for an explanation, I will now turn to that senator who very much now feels like a rented mule. Been worked hard, Senator Guru.
Senator Guru,
Thank you,
don't
Mr.
believe
Chair.
you're a mule, but come on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, donkeys, there you go. Anyway, I bring you Senate File 67. This is thankfully the last of our suite of bills this afternoon on this subject. There'll be more bills, but this subject will hopefully get down to the bottom. But it's the big one. Senate File 67, the Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions. Once again, this is for all our public employees. This public employee plan covers 34,712 general employees in the state of Wyoming, cities, counties, college, school districts, and other special districts. The state of Wyoming is the largest single employer with 7,087 active members, but K-12 education is the largest group with 18,102 active members. Overall, this plan is 80% local. So if you'll walk through this bill, a lot of the same language you'll see, but I want to point out for you, as you go through and read this bill, talks about the appropriate sections. Once again, since it's a larger program with a lot of different employees, you can see that has some nuance to it. But if you go to page 8, line 4, you'll see no amount of this appropriation is made in this section shall be used to provide the increased employee contribution provided by this act. Once again, this was part of this robust discussion your Joint Appropriations Committee had. And this is how we shook out on this issue. This plan generates this increase, which we're taking from 0.50 employee contributions by 0.50, total of 1% increases programmed over 2 years. In 24 and 25, it's split evenly between the state of Wyoming and the other employers and the employees themselves. Generates $20,609,200 per year in employer contributions. If you go down to the funding chart here, it shows you today it's at 77.2%. To do nothing will take us to 88.5% by 2053, but with this modest increase, it will take us to 99.5% of actuarial soundness by the year 2053. Once again, this is merely just kind of a readjustment to try to keep this on the path to be able to fulfill our obligations to the people who we employ. With that, I'll stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more thing that I'd like for second reading, if it's possible, and it might not be out there, but kind of a sensitivity analysis of when we're contemplating that 6.8% projected yield, we're relying on that to be accurate until 2053. And I guess it would be useful to see what that would have to be to already achieve 100% with what we've got right now, and what that sensitivity analysis would look like. So for example, what does that look like at 7.5%? What does that look like at 6.5%? Because we're putting an awful lot of stock into 6.8% being right, and we're changing policy substantially based on that. I don't know if that's an easy number for the retirement system to provide or not, but I think it would be useful to see a little bit of sensitivity analysis, and I know you don't have that right now. Second reading would be wonderful if it's available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Grew.
Thank you. And that's a great question, and we'll see if we can't get an answer to that. But I just want to caution everybody, when we're looking at these numbers until 2053, it's, a best informed guess by the actuarial folks based on the information that they have. They'll constantly be reevaluating, recalculating, and I can guarantee you that we'll probably be back, or I won't, but someone will be back here in a couple of years to go through this suite of fine little bills once again and talk about it. Now, we had a discussion about indexing this and about putting in some stopgap measures, so we just automatically do this. But it was the sense of the Joint Appropriations Committee that this body's going to want to take a look at this and keep a close eye on it. And so we did not want to try to put in any stopgaps, any automatic raises, anything like that, because we didn't want to confuse the issue. We all know we want to do what's best for our state employees, and this is the best mechanism. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, if we do a sensitivity analysis, and then I think that'll probably depend on what the retirement system has on hand. We ought to see the downside too, because 6.8% strikes me as it may be significantly higher than we can expect long term.
Further questions? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 67, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 67 is passed committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 58. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 58?
Senate File 58, Investment of State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, Act relating to unemployment compensation funds, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 58, Investment of State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. And I will give my colleague from Teton County a bit of a rest, and I'll walk you through this bill. So the background on this bill is this. We have federal unemployment insurance. That's the one we're most familiar with. And then we had at one time a state unemployment trust fund. It was created in 2002, but subsequently the legislature repealed that unemployment insurance fund and left behind $51 million balance. The legislature repurposed that fund for workforce development training. And the earnings from this fund are used to assist with workforce development training, everything from internships to CTE training is really the biggest part of it. And what's interesting is the entire 51 million is invested in the lowest returning possible fund. So this relates to my colleague from Sheridan asking, how is this invested? It's invested in what's called the state agency pool, which is one that calls for just immediate liquidity. So you're talking about, you know, they're not investing in instruments that anything other than just absolutely short term. This bill quite simply says that they are authorized to invest in Pool A, which is a higher yielding fund. It's still more liquid than the longer term funds that are maybe 70% equities. This isn't that high, but it's enough of a higher return that it will earn an additional $800,000 per year. So to just walk you through where that is, go to page 2 at the very bottom. First of all, we authorized her to invest up to 100% of the state unemployment trust fund that was previously created by 209A as determined by the director of the Department of Workforce Services. So she may not go 100%. She may hold some of that back as liquid. And then 273209 subsection B, that's a bit of cleanup. That sentence shouldn't even be there. Amounts withdrawn for payments of benefits immediately forward to the Secretary of Treasurer. That didn't get cleaned up the last time. And then subsection C, she's got a sentence there that's been struck and rewritten in subsequent sections. Earnings from the State Unemployment Trust Fund shall be credited to the Workforce Development Training Fund. That's been struck. And now the pertinent language is on on page 4, subsection D. Earnings from the investment of the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund may be credited to the Workforce Development Training Fund in amounts determined by the director, subject to the limitations of this section. They want to maintain a minimum balance of $51 million. The next sentence, if the balance of the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund at the end of fiscal year is less than the balance on July 1, 2023, that is, if they suffer a capital loss, then subsection A, a portion of the earnings from the investment of the fund shall be retained in the fund until a balance of the fund is restored to the balance of 7/1/23, which is $51 million. And subsection double Romanet 2, the annual amount of earnings retained shall not be less than 50% of the amount necessary to restore the balance of the fund. So they've got some sideboards on there to make sure that they're not taking too much money out, that they're going to be restoring this back to where it needs to be in order to hold at 51 million. In the subsequent bill, we're going to see, I think, a pretty inventive and ingenious way to direct some additional funding into this fund to actually help it grow and stay ahead of inflation. And with that, I will stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? No. All those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, to do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 58, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Senate File 58 has passed Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 59. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 59?
Senate File 59, Federal Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustment, an act relating to unemployment compensation, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee. Was referred to Committee number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinsky, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinsky, Chairman.
Senator Kinsky.
Mr. Chairman, you can see that when the majority floor leader and the president said they want some bills knocked out on the floor so we can go to work on committee of the whole, your appropriations committee put their shoulder to the wheel. Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable do pass recommendation on Senate File 59, Federal Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustment. And for a walkthrough, I will turn to my colleague, Senator Guru.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We bring you Senate File 59, Federal Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustment. And we just, in Senate File 58, we just passed, we talked about the trust fund. This is, and the good chair just was talking about how that money gets there. This is the Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund Adjustment. And as you read through this, it's just a short bill that talks about the adjustment for non-charged and effectively charged benefits, adjustment for positive and negative fund balance, computations, exceptions, and maximum rate. And you'll see all those numbers here on page 2. Basically, what this does is this. The rate formula is based on 3 factors: federal trust fund balance factor, employment support factor, non-charge ineffectively charged factor. The tax rate formula will remain the same. The bill looks at the non-charge ineffectively charged factor. This bill looks at the non-charge ineffectively charged factor only and redistributing that adjustment factor slightly differently. So currently, 60% of this fund goes to federally required state trust fund and 40% to the employment support fund. What this bill is proposing is 20% go to the federally required state trust fund, 60% going to the employment support fund, and 20% going to the workforce development training fund. Folks, remember that our unemployment fund is #1 in the country for soundness. We have the most well-funded unemployment program in the country, bar none. What this bill does is help direct some of those funds to help employers and to help businesses train new employees and work on these programs that the Workforce Services Department doing have been phenomenally successful, wildly oversubscribed, and is really producing some tangible results for businesses all across the state. Now, if you're thinking right now as a small business person like I do, and you'll ask the same question in your mind that I asked them this morning, and that was, well, if we're doing all so well, why don't we just cut what employers have to pay? I'm an employer, I'd like a break. Well, I was informed that right now the effective rate is 0. And so cutting it below 0 would be not what we do at government. So the only people who pay more than 0 rate are the most higher risk factor employers. And so I'm in one of those categories. So I do pay a small amount. Restaurants are in a more hazardous class. Sometimes I argue that point, but I've never won it yet, so I'm to quit trying. But that is the point of all this: to keep this program strong, to keep the programs that it funds strong, and also to have an unemployment program that is the envy of the nation. With that, I will stand for questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Kinsky's motion that the committee of the whole rises to report do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 59, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Senate File 59 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 2. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 2?
Senate File 2, Legislative Budget, an act relating to appropriations for the legislature, sponsored by the Management Council. It was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinsky, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinsky, Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rise and report and do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate file number 2. I'll provide an explanation. This is your legislative budget. So it's pretty simple. I'm just going to go through this. This is what funds all the functions of the legislature. Page 1 for our staff, permanent and temporary. You'll see a $9.8 million appropriation. Legislative sessions, another 1.1. If you flip over the page, it goes through all the expenditures for the normal operation of the legislature in here. Interim committee for legislators, this is your salary is 2.537. Session staff is 650,000. The employee paid benefits, 4.7. In-state travel, this is your per diem is 1.1 million. Mileage per diem for the interim is 1.2. Out of state travel, 88,000. Per diem associated with that is 118,000. Annual dues to the organizations that we belong to, NCLS, 269,000. Energy Council, 77,000. Council of State Governments, 229, and other expenditures. This includes registration fees, some of the telecommunication upgrades for the legislatures, ETS services, which includes new laptops periodically, general support. This is the copy and supplies, equipments, furnitures, contracts, special projects, statutes. This is your green books for the sessions, 335,000. Total appropriations for the legislature is 23,617. There's an additional appropriation in here out of the school foundation program account for 500,000 to assist with consultants for potential K through 12 related expenditures. Stand for any questions.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like many of you, I spent a lot of days on the road in 2023, a lot. And it seems like we meet more and more. So a couple of questions. Does this budget anticipate, I'm guessing it's just for standing committees, doesn't involve the task forces we create, we fund those separately. But can you give us a sense of how these numbers have fluctuated over the past decade or so? It just seems like we're meeting more and more, and I'm wondering if we're growing ourselves and if there's any room for trimming the fat in this budget.
Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. Chairling, with my fading memory, I don't remember what we spent last year or the year before, but certainly we can get those numbers for comparison. I will tell you, one of the things that changed substantially is associated the travel that's built in here. When we adopted the new schedule last year, we all know that no matter where you went, $109, particularly for motel expenses, wasn't being covered. We changed the way we calculate those back to those federal cost share rates. So if you have meetings in Jackson or Pinedale or Cody, some of the other more expensive places, those are indexed to the federal rates, so we could adequately cover that. Probably the biggest growth in expenditure here is in that component for that travel during the interim. I hope I'll get those numbers for second reading so we can see the growth in the legislative budget for the senator.
Senator Kinski.
And Mr. Majority Floor, following on with my Cheyenne colleague's question, I think she was asking about a decades long trend line. I'm not sure. You'd need a trend line of some length because we had that COVID interruption, which I think would have put a big dip in there. And we've had the advent of Zoom, and we've now got those Casper meeting rooms, whereas you used to have to drive all over the state or very often to Cheyenne. And so I'm interested in that data as well. I think it'd be interesting. And I guess I would also ask, the body may be interested. If you could ask LSO to drag out a memo, they did a rough cost comparison of a committee meeting by Zoom and a committee meeting in person, and Casper versus Cheyenne. And that was interesting as well. And I think that's something to bear in mind. And then a couple other follow-up items here. The memo that's been distributed, you'll see, gives you kind of an analysis on the back page you will see that the differences from the prior year's budget is about 1.9 million. And immediately below that in bold on the page 2 of the memo on this bill, you'll see on the increases where the largest increases come from. Had to add in $500,000 for school recalibration, $800,000 for LSO employee comp increases, 609 in legislator per diem costs, 200,000 for employee benefits, which includes, I didn't realize as legislators, we had workers' comp coverage, and $150,000 to host CSG West. And then decreases less for the session laws, less for management contingency, and 142,000 less in improvements to space, legislative spaces. And then there were just a couple other things we heard in the meeting today that I wanted to bring to your attention. On page 2, annual dues, one of our colleagues asked, are there any other organizations that might be eligible to be added to that list? And I can't answer that question, but I did direct my colleague to Mr. Obrick's office to get the answer to that. On page 3, section 4, carry forward of prior appropriations. That's an estimate that at about June 30, that may be about 1.8 million or less. We haven't yet finished the year. And then there were just a couple more I wanted to just point out to you here. A question that came up on page 8, section 9, economic development authorized travel. This is a section that what I heard from staff is it used to be more heavily utilized than it is now, but this involves, for instance, trips to Taiwan to promote trade with Wyoming. And this draws upon the funding allocated for out-of-state travel. And if that's exhausted, then typically management council relies on reverted funds or contingency funds. That's why there's no amount allocated on section 9. It just says it will be authorized, but it doesn't say how much. And then section 10, Wyoming State Treasurer's Investment Conference, it's $20,000 for the payment and so forth. And it doesn't actually specify where it is. Typically, it's been in Teton County. And Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I wonder if the $20,000 is predicated upon that being in Jackson, or if it were held elsewhere, if a lesser amount might actually be budgeted for that. And then the same thing on section 13, page 11, CSG annual meeting. As I understand it, it's currently slated for Jackson, and, you know, wonderful place to go, but very expensive. And my question is our hosting of CSG premised on it being in Jackson, or could it be in another town in Wyoming and perhaps at a lower cost than $150,000? Those are the two questions that I had, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Thank you.
Senator Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to help, I can answer one of those. I can't answer both. I can answer one. The Treasurers Conference, this is run by our esteemed colleague, elected official across the way. And it is held in Jackson. It's usually held with the Federal Reserve in conjunction with the Federal Reserve Board. Federal Reserve Board has been meeting in Jackson for a number of years. It didn't during COVID, and during COVID, when the Fed wasn't meeting in Jackson, the Treasurers meeting was held in Saratoga. So I know, and Lord knows I wouldn't speak for the treasurer, and he wouldn't like it if I did. But if is that I'm trying to be truthful here. But if he were here, I'm sure he would say if the Fed's being held at Jackson Lake Lodge in Jackson in August, that's where he would want to be. And when it's not, he wants to be somewhere else. And so I think he's keenly aware of that. And keenly, I know he also, all of them over there, and so are we, keenly aware of the cost of staying, especially in my neck of the woods. And so we work with the aforementioned hotelier there, and they give us pretty darn good rates, considering that $20,000 is for Capital Finance and Investment Committee and the Appropriations Committee. And since we're the value added group, a lot of us do double duty serving on both. And so you get kind of a twofer on that one. But believe me, the time in Saratoga was way more fun for me. So, but, and as far as CSG, I think the CSG has designated Teton County is where they're hosting that conference. We were scheduled to host it back and had been knee deep in fundraising for it a few years ago. And then it was canceled because of COVID. And so that kind of jumbled the plan. And so it's just more of a return engagement over past preparatory work that's already occurred. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my concern along the lines of everything that's been discussed is we've increased our ability to actually be adequately compensated for the time that we spend doing this work, which I think is fair and right. I think a lot of us in this room have subsidized our legislative travel, so I don't think that's right. But we started this session for those of us that, you know, chair even select committees, that we were asked before the session started, what are the dates we want to meet in the interim for 2024? And we haven't even come together, talked about bills, talked about issues, know what workload. It's just we're automatically assuming that standing committees are going to do the same thing that they normally do, 3 hearings, 2 days a week in various places across Wyoming. And when we start with that presumption, we're going to fill that with work. You know, good ideas, maybe, you know, because we have that time to fill, maybe we'll throw in some other things that don't rise to the top of importance of us all traveling for the interim. So I just think we really, you know, we ask a lot of our state agencies, our state employees do a lot with less. I don't know that we've ever asked ourselves to do that. And I think it's time. So I look forward to the additional information and hope we could discuss some amendments to maybe tighten our belt as well.
Further question? Oh. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I want to raise a particular concern here and also ask a question about it. Mr. Chairman, I'm frankly concerned about the growth in the time that members of the legislature are spending on legislative things. And we're gradually getting away from being a citizens legislature. And my perspective is that we are much better off as a citizen legislature. And the way I express it, Mr. Chairman, to constituents, is that with a short session, the citizens legislature, you get a situation where if a special interest group wants something special they shouldn't ought to have, legislator can say no. And the worst thing they can do to you is to beat you at the next election. And then you've got to stay home and you'll earn more money because you stick to your job. And that gives us, I think, much better results than the full-time professional legislature, where if you lose the next election because you offended a special interest group, you've got to get not only a new job, but a new profession. And people are reluctant to do that. And I'm afraid we're started down that road and headed toward the worst of all worlds, which is one that's half and half. And nobody can earn a living in the legislature and nobody can earn a living on the outside that's in the legislature. That is, and some other states have that. So I looked at the salaries we're paying for legislature, the line items there, and compared it to 2018, which is 8 years ago and before COVID. For the figures for the session are slightly increased, and I haven't done the math, but I presume that's because we got 3 more members at the last reapportionment, and I don't know whether there's a training day that is been added or subtracted in there too, but I suppose that's possible. But then I looked at the figure for legislators for the interim, and that's gone from in 2018, 1,924,000 and a few dollars to the current figure in this bill. See at the top of page 2, 2,537,000, a few odd dollars, just under a 30% increase over that 8-year period. And Mr. Chairman, I think this reflects the increase in the demands we're putting on people that are taking extra time away from their business, that are growing this legislature away from being a citizens legislature, away from being something that the best of our citizens, the most successful economically, that work full-time jobs can participate in. And I'm concerned about that. And I'm wondering, Mr. Chairman, what would be the effect on all the special task forces and that sort of thing if we took a cut and reduced that interim figure? What kind of consequences are we going to have if we do something like that? Is that an effective way to control this growth? I'm also wondering, are these figures really accurate? Or is there an increase in legislative activities that is funded by separate bills for specific special committees that is not reflected in this total figure? And are we getting in trouble there? So, Mr. Chairman, I think that's an issue we have to think pretty seriously about. I think we're letting the number of special committees get well out of hand. And frankly, I've participated in a few over the years that would have been better handled by a couple of hours of interim time. And some others, I think, would be better handled by people doing individual bills. I really wonder if we're starting to get in trouble. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my concern, and I do have a question there. Are we seeing the whole story here, or are we only seeing part of it?
President Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. I'll reply just a little to it, and I think I'm out of the rules. We've had some growth, without a doubt. But there's a couple other factors. I just pulled up the inflation calculator. This really makes it kind of interesting. You have roughly a 30% growth. If you go from 18 to 23, you've been 22% inflation. So if you take 30%, you're actually looking at 8% net, which is, I think, is probably very realistic on the thing. The other factor that's changed, and we're starting to see it change back, and I'm one of the ones that kicks back a little. We now have a meeting spaces in Casper, a lot of them good ones in Cheyenne. We kind of used to have meetings in towns like Hewitt, Sundance, Norcross. We don't do it much now because they don't got good enough internet for our new capabilities. So I don't get to have the meetings that they used to have up there. And so some of it, I think, is technology's cost some more. LSO staffing at these meetings when I was chairman early on was, you know, we had 1 or 2 staff, and we often have 3 or 4 now in some technology. And so I think some of it's pieces of all of it. I don't really argue with the great senator as far as there's been some growth. But I also think, in truth, a lot of it is just creep that's happened to all our operations. If you run an operation, it doesn't cost what it did in 2000. I think you did hit something on the head. We do fund quite a little of it outside of task forces and other stuff. The budget that's not through the standard food credit. We put that in. I'm sorry. So we do put part of that back in, I think goes back in from the outside on those task forces, and I actually like it. We do not, I'm seeing a shake of the head, but I was thinking a couple of them I've done, we've added some direct dollars too, and I kind of like to see that, because then you know exactly if you're running a blockchain technology or a specific ag bill, you know what it's costing to do it. I know a task force that I did, you know, we did the wildlife task force with the governor, and you get to see a direct cost on a bill, but the feed bill is critical. I think when you really look at what we do, folks, and we up and down dust, the other part I'll point out is back to full-time or not, you generally heap it on yourself, because I know all of you get my emails. There's lots of opportunities to do lots more than we do, and a lot of them are optional. You know, if you guys want to go to some CSG stuff, I get turned down routinely as president of the Senate, asking people to go on task force that they just soon not be on them or not do them. So, it's a blend of both. And a lot of them are really important work. I've created some of those. Several of the task forces have been mine, and one of them will be coming up in a bill soon, in regulatory task force. And they're important. They're important to the people that do them. So I think we need to think about all issues rather than just looking about cutting it. So when you really look at total cost of government, total cost of this body, this is I believe, and I can be called wrong, I think this is the leanest legislature in the United States, both from staff wise and pretty dang close to the bottom on compensation, both. So, and we meet less than most, even the ones that meet only every other year. So thank you.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, let's look at what we're talking about here. Inflation is not relevant in this figure. This figure is legislative salaries. Strictly, and those have not changed over the period I'm looking. So this is a 30% increase in our activities. The mileage and per diem is a few lines down, and that is affected by inflation. These are legislative salaries. So the amount of time that we're asking members has increased by this nearly 30%. And I am concerned with the trends that that's showing. I don't think the inflation figures affect that one bit because we haven't changed their salaries in that time. So I do suggest to the Senate, Mr. Chairman, that we're developing a problem, and I'm asking you to think about, should we respond by putting a cut to this particular line item, and what would be the consequences of that?
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to respond to one question about whether anything is outside of the bill in terms of the funding, because I do think that's an important issue. But the way the feed bill ends up working is it's going to pick up those funds after typically the initial funding timeline of a task force or select committee. So for the first year or two, whether that task force is in the budget or whether it's through a piece of legislation, then it will exist outside of the feed bill. After that, if it continues to exist and it doesn't terminate with that budget, then it will flow into the feed bill. I don't know how many exist right now. It doesn't seem like there are many funded select committees and task forces right now. I'm struggling to think of any that we've actually got. A good majority of floor leaders suggest that there's 4. Are those funded outside, though, is the question that I would ask, or whether they're funded through existing committee work. So that was one point there. But as far as the increase, I think it's important to put this in perspective on the leanness of this legislature and what our role is. We are one co-equal branch of government in the state, and the entire budget for 2 years is around $25 million. School funding alone is about 1.7 or $1.8 billion a year. We're down in tiny little percentages of the overall greater than $10 billion budget when you contemplate federal funds and the all-in funding for the state of Wyoming that we make decisions for. And we certainly can cut back. But with scaling back comes a scaling back in our representation and our ability to connect with the public, which is something this body does very well. But the way that we do that well, Mr. Chairman, is by getting out into the communities around the state, not by Zoom, not by just going to the Casper State Office building, which I like. Convenient trip for me. That's great. It's always my easiest trip, and it's cheap. But we also know that sometimes the Ag Committee needs to go out into areas where they want to talk about issues that are at hand. The Water Committee needs to be visiting around the state. Our Minerals Committee, School Facilities Committee, We need to go see things and engage directly with communities in the state of Wyoming, not just the folks that know where to show up at the state office building for a few times a year. So I think we should be careful. We like to be lean. We like to be conservative on these budgets. But I think the people of Wyoming would probably be pretty comfortable recognizing that we're well less than 1% of the state's overall expenditures for a full co-equal branch of government with the responsibility of directly engaging face-to-face on a daily basis with all of our constituents. And I certainly recognize, Mr. Chairman, that it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. None of us can get out of the grocery store in less than an hour, right? That's real. Yeah, that's real. And that's uncompensated pay, right? We're just trying to get our coupons to the counter and get out of the store and we're there for an hour every time. But Mr. Chairman, that's why we're here. That's what we signed up for. We know that it's our responsibility. And I don't want to see it diminished so we can save a few dollars. You know, we accept this, we sacrifice for it. And when we can't sacrifice any longer, that's an appropriate time to move on. And if we feel this is taking too much of our time, we can take that into consideration as well when we're deciding whether we want to come back, Mr. Chair.
Senator Dockstetter.
Thank you. Strangely enough, I find myself agreeing with my colleague this time from Laramie. We took the minerals all across the state for a good reason this summer, this summer. Minerals Committee went into the coal mine, the power plant, and the future Natrium nuclear site in Kemmer. And we went to the Trona Patch in Rock Springs. And then we went to the open coal pit mines of Gillette while we held meetings in all three of those communities. Considering what we work on as a committee, I consider those visits priceless. So I would caution that we all just go hide out in a building in Casper when we can get out and see what is the financial driving engine of this state. So a little bit of caution. And as far as time, it's up to you. This job has turned almost full-time for me. And I don't think we should hesitate to give our lives to a job that we've been elected to represent the state. So be cautious about the cuts.
Further questions? Seeing no further question being called, all those in favor of Senator Hicks' motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 2, say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 2 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration. Privilege granted, Senator Kinski.
Folks, I've got some bad news. In Sheridan, there was one of our officers was attempting to serve a warrant and was killed in the line of duty. And the suspect is barricaded in the house. SWAT team's been called, but Senator Beitman and I wanted to share with you our thoughts on the matter, after which I'd ask for Senator Dockstetter to lead us in a prayer.
This is a statement that Senator Kinski and I just issued. We are devastated by the tragic shooting in Sheridan today. As a community, we never expect this kind of senseless violence to strike so close to home. Our town lost a dedicated husband and father, more than 6-year veteran of the Sheridan Police Department, a courageous public servant.
Our prayers go out to Sergeant Nevada Krinke's family and loved ones, especially to his wife, Sheridan Police Department Corporal Carla Krinke, and their young child. We cannot begin to fathom their loss, but we join them in their mourning. May they find some comfort in knowing that Sergeant Krinke's service in the line of duty will not be forgotten by our community. As the aftermath of this tragedy continues to unfold, we remain in communication with Mayor Bridger, law enforcement, and first responders who have our full support and the full support of the Wyoming legislature. We are uplifted by the faith and unity that binds our community and know that Sheridan will emerge from this attack stronger and safer. Senator Dockstetter.
Our Heavenly Father, we ask a special blessing to be now upon the family of Sheridan Police Sergeant Nevada Krinke. This unexpected loss in his family this day will no doubt have effects throughout his family, his friends, and the entire Sheridan community. And along with that, the state of Wyoming. We pray a special blessing upon the Krinke family. We pray that thy spirit will rest with them. Please help them to feel the comfort they need at this time. Be with them. And for those who go to visit and help them, we pray that they will find the right words to say to help them through this difficult time in their life. We express gratitude for our law enforcement officers all across the state. And we express gratitude for this law enforcement officer from Sheridan who's now given his life. Please be with all associated with Sergeant Nevada Krinke in Sheridan. May thy peace and rest and comfort be with his family. And this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Senator Kinski, Biteman, for bringing that to our attention. That's greatly appreciated. Certainly my heart goes out to that family and for the loss. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 20. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 20?
Senate File 20, electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming, an act relating to public utilities sponsored by the Corporations Committee. Was referred to Committee number 7, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Barlow, Boner, Case, Landon, and Scott. Senator Case, Chairman.
Senator Case?
Yes.
There it is. Okay.
Thank you, Senator Case.
Thank you, Senator Bonner. Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a do pass recommendation on Senate File 20, electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, there are no standing committee amendments, and I ask that you yield to the good tall senator from Natrona County for an explanation of the bill.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, Senate File 20, talking about electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming. That text title adequately reflects what the bill is all about. Let me make a couple of general points first. The language that the Public Service Commission bases its rates on is very general, has to do with just and reasonable, and that's grown basically on a precedential basis. There's a lot of governing court decisions in there and what they can do. Most of those relate to the rate of return which a utility is entitled to earn on its assets. This bill is a little different. The Public Service Commission this morning, looking at the bill, testified that this wasn't going to change things very much for them. They were already trying to avoid these costs that don't benefit us. But so they were neutral in the bill. It said it didn't change things very much. To some extent, that's quite true, Mr. Chairman, but there is some importance to this one. Bill's very simple, 3 sentences. First sentence says that they're going to exclude system costs. You see that at the top of page 2, rate terms that don't benefit ratepayers in Wyoming. Second sentence says that we're talking about costs that may be excluded are facilities that are built and operated for the benefit of other states. And Mr. Chairman, we do that on a fair scale because a good part of our economy in Wyoming is based on the creation and the export of useful energy, electric energy. Part of that's because some of the fossil fuels are here, but also we have some very good locations, particularly for wind and getting some benefit out of the Wyoming wind that so much we have to put up with, appeals to us and helps our economy. So we are getting into a situation where we are having facilities built that are primarily for the base benefit of other states. And then the third sentence is the one that is, I think, the most important in this. And it says, Public Service Commission can approve a reduced apportionment of costs to Wyoming ratepayers. The extent system costs are used to serve Wyoming ratepayers, facilities that are really built for other states. And that's, Mr. Chairman, a relatively new concept in this. The typical standard has been that if it's useful to the Wyoming ratepayer, we got to pay our share of it. In the large private firm that has 6 other states in its territory, our share is about 15%. It's more in some of the ones that are more in Wyoming and less in some of the ones that are less in Wyoming, but about 15% of the costs in the large one. And typically it's been an all or nothing proposition. If it benefits us at all, we pay for it. And the trouble is, you build, Mr. Chairman, say a large wind farm because you have a mandate for carbon-free electricity out on the left coast, and you're trying to deal with that. There will be occasions that benefit Wyoming ratepayers a little. When the wind's blowing the right velocity, it can be cheaper to use an already built wind farm that's on hand, and we will use that some. But the facility is primarily built elsewhere. And the third sentence in this bill gives our Public Service Commission a push on, okay, let's get a reasonable deal, a reasonable allocation, where we do pay some, or we benefit some, but we don't pay the full cost, because the full cost is much higher than the benefit we get. It's really done for other purposes. So, Mr. Chairman, I think this bill will strengthen their hand. I think it will open the door for reasonable compromises as we deal with the multi-state, particularly the multi-state protocol that involves some of the West Coast states, Utah, Idaho to a little extent, and California, Washington, and Oregon, in addition to Wyoming. I think in dealing with those, this notion of we can pay a reduced benefit for things that have some benefit, but not too much, may be quite important for our ratepayers, Mr. Chairman. So with that explanation, I would urge the Senate to adopt the bill, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 questions. The first is, does this really provide any additional flexibility? Does this do something they can't currently do? Because as I read through this, I don't see what ends up giving them different powers than they would already have based on my understanding of their responsibility. And second, if it does do something different, did the Public Service Commission testify that this provides them with useful additional tools, holds them back, or what was their opinion on the utility of this additional language?
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm accurately categorizing the Public Service Commission testimony, which was actually very similar to the testimony we got from the large utility companies too. That their testimony was this bill doesn't do them any harm, that it is in accord with what they're already doing. Mr. Chairman, I think this bill has 2 effects. Trying to answer the first part of the question. One, it gives them a much firmer basis in statute than just and reasonable rates. This says we got to pay particular attention, and we do as an exporting state. And given the current circumstance, we've got to pay particular attention to avoiding costs that do not benefit our ratepayers. And second, I think Public Service Commission was reticent on this, and they've got pending cases before them, and that does influence their ability to testify in public. And should properly so. I think the language in the third sentence on it, that they can produce a reduced apportionment of costs. They have not been doing that, as near as I can tell. They may have a little, but they have not been doing that to the extent that it needs to be done. I think that's what will really change something. But it will give them a firmer basis on everything. So for those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I do think it's worthwhile.
Further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Case's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 20, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 20 has passed Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 14. Would the reading clerk please read Senate File 14?
Oops. Senate File 14, State Fair Board Powers and Responsibilities, an act relating to agriculture, livestock, and other animals, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee. It was referred to Committee number 5, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended by Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, Larson, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 14 do pass. And I would also move Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 14. And for an explanation of both the bill and the amendment, I call on the good senator from Park County.
Madam Senator Steinmetz, would you read in the amendment?
Would you please read in the amendment, Randy? Thank you.
Senate File 14, Standing Committee Amendment number 1, page 1, line 7, after.
All right, and then I would move Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 14. And for the, we'll do a redo and Senator Larson will present the bill and the amendment.
Senator Larson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll give you a brief description of what we did during the interim. During the interim, the Ag Committee met with the Fair Director and the process, and we discussed the process and how it is difficult to get the invoices paid in a timely manner. Specifically, the payments needed to go through the Director of the Department of Agriculture. So the bill streamlines this process. It also removes in some of the director's duties that he has over the concerning the state fair. So I'll go ahead and go through the bill and try to insert the amendment as we go. So on page 1, I'm going to the amendment inserts after fair, allowing the director of the Department of Agriculture to assign a designee to serve on the State Fair Board in his replacement. Also on page 1, it inserts on line 13, after IX, it inserts a new statute, 1110-115A little x R. On page 2, it describes, well, it takes out some parts, the bill does, that we're proposing of requirements that the director has to do. And also on page 2, it talks about what some of the Fair Board has to do. So specifically on line 9, this is dealing with the agricultural director, some of the things he needs to do. It says the director is responsible for the proper disbursement of all funds appropriated for the annual state fair and fairgrounds. And we'll add a part in there that in the bill that gets the state board to do that. And then also, there's a requirement for the state board, on line 15, through 20. And we're, deleting inside that when there's a subcommittee that is, developed, for the annual state fair. It currently states that the director shall serve as the chairman of that subcommittee. And that was a duty that, the director didn't think he needed to do. So that was an item we're taking out. And then we add on the bottom of page 2, as you can read, pursuant to the state contracting and ongoing on down. And make the procurement laws, make and execute contracts and other instruments, including financial contracts and instruments that the state fair board determines are reasonable and advisable to carry out the purposes and the programs of the state fair board. The Attorney General shall review all the contracts under this paragraph before the contracts are finalized. And then in item IX, it says the state board shall expend funds appropriated for the conduct and management of the annual state fair and for the operation and maintenance of the state fair. And then we do also have in the amendment where we've added after line 10, the section that says that the director or the director's designee shall serve as the voting member. So that's pretty much the bill and the amendment. Pretty simple. We're just trying to streamline the process to get the bills paid. Thank you.
Excuse me. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz' motion to adopt standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 14, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion to adopt standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 14 has passed. We're back on the bill. Question being called on the bill. All those in favor of Steinmetz' motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report to do so with a favorable recommendation that Senate File 14 pass, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Senate File 14 has passed committee of the whole. Majority Floor Leader Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee of the whole rise and report.
All those in favor of the motion? Say aye. Motion passes. What's that? Didn't ask for the no votes? Oh, why don't you say back up and say that? Oh.
The reading clerk will please, the reading clerk will please read the committee of the whole report.
Mr. President, your committee of the whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. Senate File 12 do pass. Senate File 47 do pass. Senate File 49 do pass. Senate File 48 do pass. Senate File 67 do pass. Senate File 58 do pass. Senate File 59 do pass. Senate File 2 do pass. Senate File 20 do pass. Senate File 14 do pass amended. Senator Cole, the chairman.
Chair recognizes Senator Cole.
Mr. Vice President, I move the adoption of the committee of the whole report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. The report has been adopted. Let's see what our next item of business is here. Folks, brief announcement. The deadline for bill drafts to be approved is Wednesday at noon. These are the bills that are already been drafted, not new bills. Wednesday at noon, deadline for approval of bill drafts. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Mr. Vice President, I move that we stand recessed until 10 a.m. Wednesday, February 14th.
Are there any announcements? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I know there's been a lot of people asking and wanting to attend tomorrow morning's Judiciary Committee meeting. So again, lining up shortly before 8 o'clock, we'll meet downstairs in W4, beginning at 8 o'clock to take up Senate File 35, Public Records, Department of Corrections Investigations. Senate File 30, Influencing Jurors and Witnesses, Judges Amendment. And Senate File 36, if time permits, Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act. Again, that's 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And I would remind fellow senators tonight, there are a couple of functions out about in the community, one of which being on your Air Transportation Committee on your behalf. I would tell you that the Airport Coalition is meeting out at the airport tonight and has a nice reception in our honor. So would encourage you to stop out there. So thank you, Mr. VP.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Your committee number 8, Transportation, will meet tomorrow, February 14th, upon noon recess in Capitol Extension Room W2 and online to consider the following bills. Senate File 15, Acceptance of Retrocession, Federal Military Installations, and Senate File 17, Plane Coordinate System Amendments.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, will meet today at 5 p.m. in the Capitol Extension Auditorium and online for a hearing on the environmental impacts of net zero and carbon negative policies. And fellow senators, there is a gift for you in your mailboxes called Wyoming and Climate Change. It gives you all the facts about that. I would also like to announce the Forest Health Briefing going on at 5 p.m., which is another critical meeting for the state of Wyoming. I am not sure right offhand what room that's in, but wander downstairs and 113 is where it's at. Thank you, Ellen. So room 113, and 2 good meetings for you tonight. Thank you.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Senate Travel Committee will meet, excuse me.
Start over again. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
muted you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Senate Travel, Recreation, Wildlife and Cultural Resources Committee number 6 will meet Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, Capitol Extension Room W2 and online to consider SF 18 Indian Child Welfare Act Safe Haven Amendments and Senate File 37 Indian Child Welfare Act Delinquency Amendments.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Vice President, your committee number 4, Education, will meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in room W110 downstairs and online. Senate File 9, Parental Rights and Education, and Senate File 19, Developmental Preschool Funding.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 9, Minerals, Business and Economic Development, meet Wednesday, February 14th upon the noon recess in room W004 and online in the Capitol Extension to hear bills, Senate File 41, Banking Division Classification and Salary Exemptions, Senate File 42, Low Carbon Reliable Energy Standard Amendments, Senate File 50, Unincorporated Nonprofit DAOs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 10, Labor, Health and Social Services, will meet bright and early at 8 a.m. tomorrow in West Room 6 and online to hear the following bills. Senate File 3, State Employee Leave for Volunteer Fire or Volunteer EMS. Senate File 4, Rehiring Retired Firefighters, Continued Retirement Benefits. And Senate File 8, Health Insurance for Volunteer Emergency Responders.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Vice President, your Appropriations Committee number 2 will meet Wednesday, February 14th upon noon recess at the State Capitol Room E301 and online. We'll hear 4 bills. Senate File 38, Financial Reporting Amendments 2, Senate File 60, 2024 Large Project Funding, SF 90, State Funded state managed local government equity investment pool. And Senate File 70, investment modernization state non-permanent funds 2.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. If you want to stay here, you got to be more enthusiastic. You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
The Senate shall stand recessed until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Yes.
Floor leader. Back to the floor leader. He already made the announcement? All right. Senate will stand in recess. Adjourned.